This is a quick case study that I'll give you guys on how we've grown Node.js at Ancestry. Most of this has been over the last year, and so I thought I'd share some tips and tricks and kind of help you guys out where you might need some help here. So my name is Robert Schultz. I'm an architect on the front-end UI team at Ancestry. Been there 5 years, and I've kind of started and helped grow some of the process around Node in the company. And so today I'm just going to run through some of these things that we've done and kind of outline a strategy that you might take for yourself or for your companies. Oops. Come on. All right, so for us, why Node, right? So we love JavaScript. We've been using JavaScript for a long time. My group's responsible for the front-end web applications at Ancestry, and we really need to build web apps that are incredibly fast, right? Like we need to build stuff at scale. We've got a lot of users, a lot of traffic, and Node has been kind of Node JavaScript has been one that's really kind of helped us get there. In addition, we also need our applications to be highly responsive. And we've been living on a Microsoft C# ASP.NET stack for a long time, so we need to start moving towards open source, and Node.js was a great fit for this. So the first thing that we did is we took a step back and we started small, right? Take one small use case. This really minimizes your risk and allows you to build something quick and lean, right? You want to use something that's low impact, but you also get some value about what you're building for the business. And your company executives, leadership should really appreciate this because you're not spending a year building a project, right? So one of the things you will learn, though, is you'll learn a lot from this very first initial pilot. We made a lot of mistakes. We went back, we fixed the mistakes. And then we kind of kept revving on that going forward. And as you build your first pilot, what you really want to do is you want to measure everything you can. Measure, measure, measure. Because since Node might be something new for you or you're taking on a new challenge, you want to know what's going on at every step of the game in your new venture into Node.js. The next thing we did is we also took a look at our guidelines. What are we going to use? Are we going to use Express, Happy, whatever it is? So we took a look at this and we decided we're going to establish a core set of libraries and modules. So for us, this was like Express, kind of your standard set that most teams have today. What you'll get out of this, though, is you'll really provide some good bumper rails for your teams in the company, right? What you don't want is a wild, wild west of 50 different modules, 50 different libraries going different directions, and it's very difficult for the company to invest in Node when everybody's doing things differently, right? So as you do this, though, document everything, right? You might have 1 or 2 teams doing Node. Going forward, you might have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you want those learning lessons documented as you go forward, or what modules that you use. And then what we started to do is we started to engage the community. Really awesome community. We reached out to a few people. We reached out to PayPal, to Groupon, a little bit at Walmart, Uber a little bit. And the one thing you'll notice is these guys are really awesome. They'll help you grow. They'll give you like their learning lessons, right? Like you should learn from them. They've solved a lot of the problems that we don't need to solve today. And we can get a lot of feedback from talking to these people in the industry. One thing I really recommend is just use Twitter. We've reached out to tons of people on Twitter and asked questions about how do we solve certain issues, how do we solve scaling issues, and everyone's really helpful to give you feedback and help out. Next thing we did is we started to build a culture, right? So we've talked to people, we've got some of the war stories, we know how things work. We started to form an internal culture around Node in the company. So what we did is we formed something called a guild. This is taken from Spotify's development process. But it's just a horizontal group passionate about a specific subject. In this case, Node for us, it could be UX, it could be testing, whatever it might be. We have a few different ones. But what we do is we meet regularly to talk like, how are we solving certain things? How are we making sure we're on the same page? If we're looking into using something like Happy instead of Express, like that we're all talking about it and we're in agreement about it. And this is really good for transparency within your development culture to make sure you're doing things the right way, right? And what it also does is it brings our devs together around Node as opposed to just lunchtime or whatever it is. So we get to take time, we get to do hackathons, things like this, right? And the last bit on this is we've actually brought in a few people to talk with us for this. So like I mentioned in the community, some of those people that we've reached out to, we've actually brought them in and spend an hour talking about their experience, right? And then what we did is, like a lot of us were new to Node in the company, and so we wanted to make sure that we weren't just taking people who've got front-end JavaScript experience and expecting them to build scalable, distributed Node apps. So we actually worked with Nearform on this, and they came in and we trained an initial set of developers to kind of get a good base in Node.js. And the idea there was after these guys became trained, they kind of started to build their stacks, and then they're responsible for scaling that out horizontally and helping train other developers, right? There's a few people here at the conference that do this sort of external training. Reach out to them or myself, and I can connect you. All right, so we got some training, we got a good culture going, people are starting to build some stuff for production. Now, as we're scaling teams out, we need a better way to manage how we do new stacks going forward. So a lot of you guys have probably used Yeoman for a scaffolder. Great tool if you haven't used it. What we did was we basically developed a few generators for Yeoman, which was essentially building API type applications and UI applications. This is really good though because it allows us to define like what's the best practice for project structure, right? The big question we get from new people are like, how should I sort my routes and my controllers and all that stuff? So this really helped us define that baseline process on this, right? As well as introducing things like gulp in the build process and custom middleware and stuff like that too. And then we started to have some needs internally for modules. So what we did is we set up an NPM registry. Sinopia is a great one. It's free, it's open source, it's an NPM module itself. This allows you to push stuff to your own private registry internally. But we had a bigger need. We were also already using a tool called Artifactory, so we just dumped all our NPM modules in Artifactory instead. NPM also offers their own private NPM registry now. But the one thing that I wanted to call out here that we keep in mind is everything should be library agnostic as you start to build internal modules. Don't build anything that's coupling to Express or Happy or anything like that, because if you move later to different frameworks, different libraries, you can easily just port your stuff over and you don't have to rebuild it now for another library. And this is something that we've kind of built as a core principle with our internal modules. So this is kind of where we're at, 6 months in. We took a step back. We started to build a good culture, moving things towards like Node and open source. We had 4 teams in production using Node, 8 internal modules, not a whole lot, but for the first 6 months it wasn't bad. We're starting to see really good wins in development speed and morale within the teams. I don't know if that's just coming from C# or whatever, but like a lot of people started to really feel more energized in building applications. But there was still some pushback in the org. People still weren't bought into the whole Node thing, and especially back in teams and stuff like that. So there's still some work to be done, right? So pushing forward, kind of mid-year, we started to make things a little bit more automated, so we moved all our modules into a Jenkins server. So every time we check in something on any of our private NPM modules, it automatically runs Mocha tests, unit tests. We're using a tool called SonarQube, some people may have used for code metrics. This gives us like lines of code covered and technical debt and things like that. And then we're also using Sauce Labs for cloud-based Selenium testing. So we can test on Windows 10, Windows 8, OS X, all that kind of stuff automatically. And when everything passes on our CI process for our modules, we'll bump the module version, automatically commit it into the registry for use, right? And we manage that version process ourselves for major, minor, and patch, just kind of depending on what we're doing. And then now we've got to really step back and look at the big things, right? So we've got a lot of these big applications. You guys have heard of the monolithic stuff before, I'm sure. But what we started to do is we started to look at where are the points that we could actually peel off in our big stacks. So the big, 100,000 line applications, where can we start to peel back and rewrite things in Node? So what we did is identified good routes, URL routes that we can slice off. So say like a /profile route that handles all the profile management on an app. We put Nginx load balancer in front of that, and then we just rebuild that piece, and then we start to run it to the new Node application. We do this though in an A/B test way. So if control versus the new Node application isn't performing very well at 1% of traffic, we can turn it off, figure out what the issue is, and then kind of look at it again, right? This really helps to ramp up traffic and make sure what you're building something right, and it's going to work the same for your users, right? So as you kind of keep peeling these pieces off of your monolith, just keep doing that all the way till you essentially have nothing left, right? And so you rebuild all these little slices of your application into smaller little APIs or whatever it might be, and then wash, rinse, repeat on any other stack that you want to convert to Node. So for metrics, I said log everything you can. And I'm pretty serious about it. Like, do whatever you can to get metrics in your application. Node is kind of a odd like beast to tackle because there's just not a whole lot of stuff out there. There's some good open source stuff. So you may have to do things yourself. You may use kind of some SaaS providers for some things. But for us, we're using StatsD. So this is how we're going to collect custom metrics for our Node apps. We're using Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, which is called Elk Stack. Some of you have been using this for logging forensics. Used to use Splunk, but we're moving more towards this open source stack where every team kind of manages it themselves. And then all the messages that go from Elasticsearch and the Elk Stack are all pushed through the Apache Kafka bus. So this is how we send all our logs and stuff through the bus in the network, which eventually gets all the way down to Hadoop. So this is how we collect our logs. There's a lot of interesting things you can do around this, but this is an internal solution for us because most of our stuff's on-prem, so we're not using anything external for this. And then performance, kind of the second piece of that. For us, we've been using Zabbix. Zabbix is an on-prem kind of metrics or monitoring tool that you can set up. This is because we traditionally still have VMs for all of our stacks instead of, we're not deploying to AWS or anything like that. So it's internal VMs. You can use collectd. This gives you kind of the same thing. But one of the things you really want to keep in mind is what you want to do is you want to monitor your CPU, your memory usage, memory leaks, generate flame graphs, things like this that you've probably seen at the conference this week. A few people talking about different tools to do this. It's not easy, right? So it's pretty tough to do. There's some interesting products out there coming along. I mean, you guys have probably all used New Relic that gets you a lot of this stuff. NodeSource has got a cool product called InSolid that gives you like a lot of the flame graphs and cool things like that. Strong loop, key metrics, all that kind of stuff. These guys are really kind of owning this space right now. So if you're not worried about on-prem stuff or whatever it might be, take a look at them and they give you all this stuff. But you should be using this out of the box. And lastly, for what we're doing with Docker here is we're not quite deploying to production with Docker, but what we're doing is when we're generating our Yaman generators, we're automatically giving everybody a Docker file ready to go that will allow them in their development environment to spin up the application with Docker and start to get familiar with Docker. What we're doing is we're actually building an internal Kubernetes cluster, which will be used to deploy all our Node applications out into production, which we're looking to get the first pilots up and running by the end of this year. But what we want to do is start to get everyone familiar with Docker, how Docker works, how to get used to it, how to deal with the boot to Docker stuff or whatever it is on OS X and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of where we're at right now. We have 10 teams now working with Node.js. And the group that's working with this is about 100 people in this group. So plus a few other kind of satellite groups in the company. But we've got about 10 teams working right now. Probably by end of next year, it will be 15 or more. We made a decision all front-end applications will now be built in Node.js. So anything new, any new stuff for 2016 will be in Node. We'll still continue our effort to rebuild our legacy. We've got a lot of legacy stuff that we're looking to move over. But anything new right now, we're putting more priority on Node. And the good thing is we've got full buy-in across the organization all the way up to the CTO with Node. Like he's all in, thumbs up. They even came to our last meetup with like Node.js t-shirts, which is kind of cool. And we'll continue to invest in better tools, right? So logging, monitoring, whatever works better for us that we can find that solves the problem in a better way. We'll continue to invest in that, as well as building better scaffolders. Like if we're switching or we want to provide people the ability to say, okay, you can do now either Express or Happy or Restify. We'll build some scaffolders that have all our dependencies and all that stuff baked in. And kind of lastly, for us, share our successes, what we learned, and hopefully a year later, seeing somebody else up here talking about their last year of what they learned building Node and bringing Node into their ecosystem. That's really it. Open for questions. Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned you had some pushback from folks. Was it mostly technical or cultural or something else? Like what are the lessons you learned?
The question was on the pushback side of things. Is it technical or cultural or business or whatever? I think it was kind of a combination of everything. From the business perspective, Node kind of felt like it's the startup tool. It's a new thing on the block. Do we want to go rewrite a bunch of stuff because in like a year or two, we're going to go do something else, right? So that was a worry there. My argument is JavaScript's been around forever. It's like the language of the web, so I really doubt that it's going to go anywhere, right? And then there was some worry with the split, the IO fork, how things were going to go, which now is pretty obvious, like where things are going, right? And we're back on board. So I think it was just doing that first slide that I talked about, start small, to show the value as we grow, instead of trying to say, like, let's go rewrite everything, and then we realize it doesn't work for what we're trying to do, right? So starting small created a real high level of envy in the company, and then people were like, oh, we want to go do that, right? And that started to happen quite a bit. Yeah?
As you were carving off little pieces of your monolith and kind of moving them over to smaller node services, were you kind of doing data migrations to some new data store, or were you kind of still going back to the same?
At this tier, no, because the way we're structured is our whole group on the front end side just calls backend services. So it's just aggregating backend services, which are like Java services. So we didn't have to deal with any of that. Any other questions? Yeah.
I guess just kind of as an add-on to that, what in that development process, what were some of the biggest struggles that they had to get past?
Yeah, so in the peeling process of breaking the monolith, what were some of the struggles to get past? I think initially just trying to solve how we do that in the first place, right? Like, what do we use? Do we use Nginx? Do we use a different type of like reverse proxy, right? How do we deal with, the big part is we were splitting from an old C#, most likely C# or ASP.NET stack to a Node stack, where in C# and ASP.NET we have like all the counters and metric stuff that we get in IIS and all that other stuff, and we've had years of building that up, where the new ones that were split off, we had to like kind of figure things out as we went, right? So initially that was a little tough, and we're still solving a lot of those problems, but I'd say that was kind of the big one, just to kind of figure out how do we do it the right way. And A/B testing, like what's the right way to A/B test that and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Is Node getting any traction on the back end? Give it a year or two. I don't know. We'll see. We're kind of doing things a little bit differently, and you know, we're essentially kind of breaking apart the Microsoft side of the stack into open source. And so we've kind of picked Node for the front end. They picked Java for the back end for now. And I think if we can kind of prove out that like Node has a good use case on some of the stuff on the back end, which, you know, I know some companies are starting to invest a lot there, we'll kind of figure out if that makes sense for us. Right now, we're just trying to own one piece so we can get it right and make sure it scales and it's solid, and we can move forward from there. Anything else? Oh, one more. Okay. What was that? How long did it take to do all this? It's about a year. Like, this is kind of like this year. Like, we started, it was really like end of last year, like end of 2014. I started to evangelize a little bit on the Node side internally to figure out what that means and what we should do. But we got the first team really doing something essentially in January. And then we scaled that out kind of team by team by team. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff we learned. We made a few bad decisions that we fixed pretty quickly. Because we were starting small, right? And so it allowed us to kind of set, you know, the right course of direction for us instead of spending like 6 months doing something. So, you know, a lot of it is like the traditional stuff of Node, of like how some threading issues and blocking calls and stuff like that, right? But yeah, we're running pretty good at scale now though, with about 10 teams. Anything else? All right, thanks.